The studio lights burned brightly, their intensity contrasted with the charged atmosphere, something no one could quite name. The audience cheered enthusiastically as the main camera focused on center stage. The talk show's logo glowed on the screen behind the host, Vanessa Torres, ever poised, smiling with rehearsed professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves. The ovation filled the room. Keanu entered with measured steps, dressed entirely in black, his trademark calm aura intact. He offered the audience a shy smile, then Vanessa, before taking his seat. "Keanu, it's a pleasure to have you here," Vanessa said, her voice polished for prime time. "Thank you. The pleasure is mine," he replied, his voice low but firm. Everything was perfectly arranged. The chairs close, a gleaming coffee table, water bottles on either side. But what was about to unfold wasn't in the script. Vanessa began with the usual questions, his new movie action scenes, behind-the-scenes anecdotes. Keanu answered with his usual grace, thoughtful yet warm. The audience laughed at moments, leaned in at others. Everything was proceeding as expected. Until it wasn't. Vanessa flipped one of her cue cards and smirked playfully. And speaking of on-screen chemistry, we have to talk about speed. Sandra Bullock, what a duo. A light chuckle rippled through the crowd. But Keanu didn't laugh. He paused. His smile faded slightly, his gaze drifting. For a moment, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa noticed. She was too professional not to sense the shift in energy. "Keanu," she asked gently, "are you okay?" He took a deep breath, adjusted his posture, his eyes still distant. "Yeah, it's just..." He hesitated. A faint smile returned, but it was different, weighted with memory, with something he'd kept silent for too long. "You look like you just remembered something," Vanessa said, her voice softer now. Keanu glanced down for a second, then met her eyes before addressing the audience. "I think today's the day I share something I've never said publicly." Absolute silence. Not even the crew moved. Vanessa straightened slightly, surprised, but didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "People always talk about the chemistry Sandra and I had in Speed." Keanu began. "And yeah, there was something there. Something beyond the scenes. But it was never spoken. Not even between us." He leaned back in his chair. The camera zoomed in, capturing the lines on his face, the softness in his eyes. A serene tension hung in the air, as if something sacred was about to be revealed. "Her name," he said, savoring the words before releasing them, "changed the tone of my day. Always did." Vanessa watched him closely, silent. The audience was frozen. Some eyes already glistened. Something deeply human was surfacing. "For a long time, I thought it was just me," Keanu continued. "One of those fleeting infatuations you keep to yourself. But over time, I realized it might have been more than that." He paused. "More how?" Vanessa whispered. Keanu smiled, small, almost melancholic. "More real, more lasting, more quiet." The audience didn't move. "But the strange thing," he added, "is I never said it. Not to her. Not to anyone. Until now." Vanessa kept her expression neutral, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew this was big. Bigger than a segment. Bigger than an exclusive. "Why now, Keanu?" she asked. He reflected for a long moment. The silence between question and answer was unscripted. "Because I think I'm ready, and maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Sometimes the most important story is the one we never tell." Vanessa glanced at the production team. No one dared interrupt. No cuts. No commercials. What was happening no longer belonged to the script. Keanu laced his fingers together, looked at the audience, and said, "I had feelings for Sandra. Real feelings." And so it began. Vanessa sat motionless. What was supposed to be a relaxed chat, another night of TV, had taken a turn even she, with all her experience, hadn't anticipated. Keanu had confessed something he kept hidden for over 2 decades. "When you say real feelings, what exactly do you mean?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost maternal. Keanu nodded slowly. "I had a crush on her. A genuine one from the start." A soft exhale swept through the audience. Not gossipy murmurs, but a collective sigh of empathy. What Keanu had just said didn't sound like a trivial confession. It sounded like truth. It started on the speed set, he continued. We were young, professional, focused, but between takes, during rehearsals, in downtime, in conversations we shared on rides to set, I started noticing things. He looked up, letting memory fill the gaps. She laughed at everything, he said, warmth evident, but not in a forced way. She found joy in the simplest things. She was magnetic, had this lightness in her soul. I remember thinking, how can someone be so deep and so free at the same time? Vanessa smiled, moved, and she never knew? Keanu shook his head. I never told her. I thought it might ruin what we had professionally. I didn't want to risk that connection. And honestly, I assumed it wasn't mutual. So I kept it. He paused briefly, leaning forward slightly. You know those moments when you're close to someone, and you start noticing their rhythms, their silences, their favorite tea, the way they tilt their head when they're thinking? I noticed all of that. And the more I noticed, the deeper it got. Vanessa looked down for a second, as if recognizing something from her own past. Did you fall in love with her? She finally asked. Keanu didn't answer immediately. His gaze settled on the floor, searching for words. I fell in love with the version of her I knew then. Maybe even the one I imagined. Love, I don't know, but it was something powerful. The entire studio seemed suspended in reverent stillness. No one moved, not the crew, not the audience, not the host. They were all caught in this truth that wasn't shouted but offered with quiet respect. Vanessa, balancing professionalism and emotion, slowly turned a cue card but didn't read it. Something told her to let Keanu set his own pace. Was there ever a moment you almost told her? She asked. Keanu nodded, as if watching the scene unfold now. Yeah, there was a day. We were on a break between takes, sitting on some crates, eating sandwiches. She was talking about her dog, something completely mundane, and I couldn't stop looking at her hands, how they moved when she spoke. He paused. That's when I knew. I'd crossed an invisible line. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was personal. I felt in trouble. He laughed softly, but with a tinge of sadness. And still, I kept it all. Every second. I got very good at pretending it was just a friendship. Vanessa nodded, her eyes slightly misty. It's a very recognizable kind of pain, loving in silence. Keanu looked at her knowingly. Yeah, and in our world where everything's exposed, where everything's magnified, there's something sacred about feelings that are never spoken. They stay untouched, maybe even more real because no one ruined them. Vanessa let the thought linger. There was something almost spiritual in what Keanu was sharing. But if you never talked to her about it, how do you know it wasn't mutual? She asked. He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes and answered with a quietness that shook the room. Because I wasn't the only one. A hushed murmur spread through the studio. Vanessa blinked, processing what she'd just heard. What do you mean? She asked, barely above a whisper. Keanu held her gaze, deliberate. She felt it too. She didn't tell me, but she told someone. Vanessa fell silent for a beat, her mind racing through the past. A vague memory sharpened into focus. She said cautiously, remember something? Years ago, Sandra mentioned it to me. Off camera, backstage in an award show. Keanu watched her intently. We were having wine, Vanessa continued. She was relaxed, a little nostalgic, and she said it like a throwaway confession. I had a huge crush on Keanu during Speed, but I never said anything. Didn't want to ruin the friendship. Keanu nodded slowly, a smile brimming with unspoken emotion. I think she meant it. She just didn't want to break what we already had, and neither did I, so we danced around it for years. Vanessa took a deep breath. This wasn't just a secret anymore. Now it all made sense. Keanu leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the years settle on his shoulders. I kept it to myself. He repeated softly, but I wasn't the only one. The studio froze. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Do you remember the moment you first heard she might have felt the same? Vanessa asked. Keanu nodded. Years later. Someone mentioned it in passing. A producer, I think. He said, "Did you know Sandra once said she had a crush on you during Speed?" And I laughed, thought it was a joke, but those words stayed with me. Vanessa leaned forward, moved. "Did you ever see that interview?" He gave a faint smile. "Yeah, eventually I did. Saw her at a press conference, drinking coffee, being herself. And she just said it, dropped it like it didn't matter." Vanessa looked down. "But it did." Keanu met her gaze with a mix of tenderness and pain. "It did. And I thought, what the hell were we doing?" "I started thinking about all the moments we could have said something," Keanu said, letting his words fall like smooth stones into silence. "So many rap parties, so many dinners, so many calls that lasted longer than they should have." His voice wasn't sad, but it carried history. But we both stayed quiet, maybe out of fear, or maybe out of respect. We were aware of what we had, that connection, that understanding. We didn't want to risk it. Vanessa nodded. "It wasn't flirting." "No," Keanu affirmed. "It was deeper, like we were speaking a language no one else understood." The studio was motionless. Vanessa, ignoring her cue cards, let the moment guide her. "Did you ever wonder what would have happened if either of you had been brave?" Keanu smiled, but without joy. "Yeah, I wondered a lot. On lonely nights, in the middle of a shoot, or watching one of her movies. I'd think, what if I'd said something? What do you think would have happened?" Vanessa whispered. "I think everything would have changed," he said honestly. "For the better? I don't know. For worse? Maybe not. But it would have been different. Maybe we just weren't ready." Vanessa studied him. "Do you believe in perfect timing?" Keanu nodded. "Absolutely. Timing is everything. But it can also be cruel. Sometimes the right people meet at the wrong time." Another deep silence followed, but not an uncomfortable one. A silence full of understanding. "But I don't regret what we didn't say," he added. "I think we protected something valuable." Vanessa narrowed her eyes, thoughtful. "Just because it didn't turn into love doesn't mean it wasn't love." "Exactly," Keanu replied. "It was a kind of love. Quieter, more respectful, but real." He leaned forward slightly, as if the memory were wrapping around him again. "There was a premiere," he said. "We hadn't seen each other in years. We hugged, talked for a few minutes, and it was like no time had passed. No awkwardness, the same rhythm as always." His voice grew even quieter. "And when she walked away, I remember thinking, this will always feel like home, even if I never live there." The audience remained utterly silent. "I think people wanted our Speed characters to end up together in real life," Vanessa said gently. Keanu offered a small smile. "Those characters weren't entirely fictional. They were us without the fear." Vanessa glanced at her cue cards, but didn't read them. She chose to improvise. "Do you feel like you missed your chance?" Keanu lowered his head, thought for a moment, then answered, "Yes and no. Some chances are meant to be missed, so they stay perfect." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I won't lie. There were nights I thought, what if we'd been a little braver? And what do you think would have happened if you had been?" "Everything would have changed," he said without hesitation. "Maybe for the better, maybe not. But something in me believes we weren't ready for what that meant." Vanessa looked at him with a mix of respect and emotion. "Do you believe in second chances?" Keanu paused before answering. "I believe in memories that stay with you tenderly. Not everything needs to repeat to have value." And then, just as the topic seemed to close, Keanu murmured, "But what happened after changed everything we thought we knew about each other?" Vanessa said nothing. There was something in Keanu's last words that didn't just move her, it left her breathless. Even the cameraman had forgotten, for a moment, that they were working. Keanu adjusted himself slightly in the chair, more upright, more intimate in his tone. "The years went by," he said. "We went on with our lives, projects, travels, relationships. Sometimes we crossed paths. That same ease between us was always there. But we never talked about it. About the almost." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Not even once?" "Not until much later. he replied. I think we both carried that silence out of respect, and maybe out of fear of discovering that we had lost something important. His gaze became more intense. But we talked about it. Eventually, a soft murmur moved through the audience. They leaned in involuntarily, as if afraid to miss a word. It was years later, he continued, at a charity event in Los Angeles. We ended up having a drink together. Just the two of us. It wasn't planned, and maybe that's why it worked. Vanessa raised her eyebrows without interrupting. I told her the truth, Keanu confessed, that I had felt something for her during Speed, that for years I wondered if it had been mutual. And what did she say? Vanessa asked, barely breathing. Keanu smiled with disarming tenderness. She laughed. That laugh of hers I remembered so well. And she said, Keanu, you know it was... There was a small emotional tremor in the studio, as if everyone had been holding their breath for too long. She confessed she felt it too, he continued, but buried it, for the same reasons I did, not to ruin something that was already valuable. Vanessa's eyes were glassy. And what happened after that? Keanu took a deep breath. We smiled at each other, like two people who had been reading the same book in silence for 20 years. Did it hurt to know she had felt the same and nothing ever happened? Vanessa asked, her voice nearly trembling. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He lowered his gaze, letting the question breathe. Yes, he said at last. And no, it was a mix of warmth and sting, but mostly peace, because we were no longer the same kids on an action set. We had lived. We had lost. We had grown. Vanessa looked at him as if he were speaking for everyone who had ever felt something similar. And what did you do after that conversation? Keanu held her gaze with honesty. We hugged. We thanked each other for being honest. And we said that maybe at that moment we had been exactly what the other needed, even if it wasn't meant to last. He paused and added, It's strange to look someone in the eye and say, I loved you in silence. And it's okay that it stayed that way. Vanessa took a deep breath. It was hard to speak when Keanu's words landed with such truth. I think many people believe a story only has value if it ends in a relationship, she said. Keanu shook his head. No. Sometimes the purpose of a connection isn't to be together. Sometimes it's simply to remind you what it feels like to feel. Vanessa looked at him as if his words were echoing inside her. That's beautiful. And real, he replied. There's a strange kind of happiness in knowing that we were both brave enough to feel it, even if we weren't brave enough to say it at the time. And how would you describe what you two had? Vanessa finally asked. Keanu didn't hesitate. It was a form of love, quiet, respectful, real, and it stayed with both of us, even if we never named it. The camera slowly zoomed in on Keanu's face. Not one of sadness, but something deeper, living memory. Vanessa leaned in, moved, and asked, and after all that, did each of you find happiness separately? Keanu nodded calmly. Yes, we found love in other places, different paths. But something she told me that night has never left me. What was it? Vanessa asked, intrigued. Keanu looked directly into the camera lens, as if speaking to someone far away, or maybe to himself. She said, maybe we were meant to find each other for a completely different reason. Vanessa softly repeated the line, almost like a prayer. What do you think she meant by that? Keanu let the question float. I've thought about it hundreds of times. At the time, I didn't fully understand. But now I think she meant we weren't there to live out a romantic story. We were there for something deeper, quieter, like presence. Vanessa furrowed her brow slightly. Presence. Yes, she came into my life when I was drifting, Keanu said. I was just starting to understand what fame really was, beginning to see all I would have to sacrifice to stay in this world. And she, his voice filled with light. She was normal, grounded, light, but not superficial. She had depth, pain, curiosity. She could laugh and cry in the same breath. Vanessa listened with eyes full of emotion. And what did she remind you of? She asked. Keanu lowered his gaze and then looked back up with serene intensity, that it was still safe to smile. The audience was completely still, as if something sacred were unfolding before them. After a few losses I lived through, Keanu continued, I started building walls. Without realizing it, I became harder, more closed off. His voice was calm but full of depth. From the outside, people didn't notice. I smiled, work delivered, but inside, I was shutting down. Vanessa lowered her eyes. She knew what he was talking about. And then I met her. A pause, and it was like a small earthquake, Keanu said, just enough to shake off the dust. Vanessa gave a genuine smile. Do you think it was destiny? No, it was something greater, he replied. Destiny is directional. This was grace. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes a gift isn't a relationship. Sometimes a gift is a reminder that you can still connect, that your heart still works, that there's still softness inside you. Vanessa whispered, did she know she had that effect on you? Keanu smiled with sweet nostalgia. I think so. Maybe not completely, but I felt it. She always had that ability to see people, not the public version, the one we hide. Then, in an even quieter voice, he said, after Jennifer and Ava died, everything turned dark, not just outside. Inside me, too. There were days I didn't speak to anyone, days I didn't want to move. Vanessa briefly closed her eyes. And then I thought of her, Keanu said, of her laugh, of her eyes, of her ridiculous impressions. And something in me shifted. He took a breath. Not because I wanted her to save me, but because she reminded me of a version of myself that was once okay. She became something like a spiritual touchstone for me, Keanu said, his voice almost sacred. Not as a lost love, but as a light that never went out. Vanessa could barely speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. Sometimes, Keanu continued, people are gifts, not because they stay, but because they arrive right when your soul needs a witness. The words resonated powerfully in the silence. No one coughed. No one moved. I never saw her as a missed opportunity, he added. That would diminish her. She was a gift, and you don't mourn a gift. You honor it. You protect it. Vanessa swallowed hard. You think she knew you saw her that way? Keanu nodded tenderly. I hope so. I think I told her, in all the ways that don't require words. A kind of thank you expressed in how you show up, in how you stay soft, even when life tries to harden you. Vanessa paused for a long moment, then, with a trembling voice, asked the question on everyone's mind. Would things have been different if all of that had been said sooner? Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked down, closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and gazed into the distance. I remember that day clearly, he said. We just finished a driving scene. It was an emotional take, just something technical. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. He took a deep breath. That morning, my sister had passed me a message. Carefully, not wanting to worry me. Jennifer, my partner at the time, had been taken to the hospital. Complications with the pregnancy. The studio froze. 2 days later, Ava was stillborn. No one reacted, only stillness. And 3 weeks after that, Jennifer died in a car accident. Vanessa brought a hand to her mouth. The grief hanging in the studio was so real, it could almost be touched. Keanu lowered his gaze. I shattered inside, he said, and I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want it public. I didn't want pity. I didn't want headlines. I just wanted to disappear. A long pause. And I almost did, he added, his voice barely audible. The energy in the studio wasn't sad. It was sacred, a space where the soul spoke without masks. I stopped answering calls. I didn't leave the house. I was still under contract for a film, but I couldn't focus. I was on set, surrounded by lights, cameras, people, and I felt absolutely nothing. Vanessa could barely ask. And Sandra? Keanu slowly looked up. She didn't know the details, but she sensed it. She sent me a letter, handwritten. I still have it. He took a deep breath to continue. It just said, Don't let the silence steal your tenderness. The world still needs your kindness. He closed his eyes for a second. It was the first time I cried in weeks. Vanessa couldn't hold back a tear. The entire studio had become a temple. One night, Keanu continued, I said a prayer. I was never a religious person, but that night I spoke. I said, God, if there's anything left of me worth saving, send me a sign. He paused, and his voice grew more intimate. And the next day, she showed up. The studio was motionless. No one breathed. She was doing a script reading on another set nearby. We ran into each other by accident. She hugged me, a little longer than usual, and she said, Hey, I missed you. Keanu closed his eyes briefly. In that moment, I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel whole, but I stopped feeling alone. Vanessa had tears in her eyes. So did the audience. But no one wept loudly. It was a quiet, deep crying, full of compassion. Do you think she was that sign? She asked, her voice breaking. Keanu nodded slowly. Yes, she wasn't sent to stay, or to rescue me, but to remind me there was still something soft in the world, that God hadn't completely abandoned me. He looked at the audience as if he knew each of them. Many think divine intervention is a lightning bolt, a visible miracle. But sometimes it's a person smiling at you just when you've forgotten how to smile back. He paused, like someone holding something fragile in their hands. Sometimes it's someone who arrives without knowing your pain, but touches it anyway. He leaned forward. I never fully told her what she did for me. It wasn't necessary. That's the beauty of grace. It doesn't need recognition. It just arrives and saves what's left. The studio was never the same after those words. Even the crew had tears they tried to hide. I'm not a religious man in the traditional sense, Keanu said, but I believe in timing. I believe in the sacred. I believe God sends us people when we forget we're still human. His voice softened further. She showed up, not to stay, but to show me what I was losing. He was silent for a moment. Then, as if speaking to his younger self, he said, Love isn't always staying. Sometimes love is simply arriving at the right moment. Vanessa nodded, unable to hold back tears. And Sandra arrived. Keanu smiled with a tenderness that needed no words. She did, without staying, without trying to fix me. Just reminded me who I was before the pain. Keanu took a deep breath. His words weren't dramatic. They were like a whisper of truth settling into the soul. I've come to believe people are mirrors, he said. Sometimes all we need is for someone to reflect a part of us we've forgotten. Vanessa looked at him, no longer pretending to be in control. She was just another guest in this story. You think a connection like that ever really ends? She asked. Keanu shook his head gently. No, because the message remains, even when the moment is gone. Even if the person is no longer there, what they awaken in you doesn't disappear. He paused, thoughtful for a moment. I still think about her. Not with longing, not with regret, just with gratitude. Vanessa tried to steady her voice. And what do you hope people take away from all this? From your story? Keanu looked up straight into the camera. That not all stories end in romance, but that doesn't make them any less valuable. That even if something doesn't become everything, it doesn't mean it wasn't something. Something real. Something sacred. The silence was total. Reverent. We wait for perfect love, he continued. The grand finale. The happily ever after. But sometimes the most powerful love is the one that simply passes through your life gently and leaves you better than it found you. Vanessa brushed away a tear with her fingertips. That's beautiful, she whispered. Keanu simply nodded. Some people don't stay, but the message they leave behind lasts forever. And so, under studio lights, cameras that had forgotten to move, and an audience moved to their core, Keanu finished a story that had never been told. A story of quiet love. Real, unforgettable. The studio remained in absolute silence, as if everyone present understood they had witnessed more than just an interview. This wasn't about celebrities or nostalgia. It was the bare soul of a man speaking of the most intimate thing, the love that never was, yet still changed his life. Vanessa, her eyes red and voice trembling, asked, "If Sandra were watching you right now, what would you say to her?" Keanu didn't hesitate. He looked straight into the camera and, with profound calm, said, "Thank you for your laugh, for your light, for arriving just when I needed to remember the world could still be kind." He paused for a moment. "You weren't mine and I wasn't yours. But we met, and that was enough." The words hung in the air like a prayer. "Thank you for seeing what no one else did. Thank you for not trying to fix me, just for being there." Vanessa covered her mouth, deeply moved. The audience barely breathed. Keanu smiled softly. "I carried you with me in the quiet moments, on the good days, and on the days when only the memory of you kept me soft, when everything else tried to harden me." One final pause. "And if you ever doubt whether your presence mattered in this world, know that in mine, it changed everything." Vanessa nodded slowly, wordless, and the studio, which had begun as just another TV set, transformed into something sacred, a place where time stood still to honor the beauty of a story never before told, a story of two souls who recognized each other, cared for each other, and set each other free, a story that, though it didn't end with a kiss, will live forever